Welcome back to Story Time with GamGam. And today we're going to have another story in Winnie the Pooh's Bedtime Stories. And remember last time we had a story from Gopher. And the story did not make Winnie the Pooh tired. So let's see if Eeyore will have any success this time. Prince Eeyore. It was a very warm day in the 100-acre wood, and Eeyore had been walking for a long time. He was hot and weary and sad, mostly because his tail had fallen off sometime after breakfast, and he had spent the hours since then walking back and forth over his footsteps, searching for it without success. He had thought about asking his friends for help, but discovered them all gathered in Rabbit's garden, pushing and tugging on a large boulder located smack in the middle of the carrot patch. They were all panting and wheezing and seemed to be having such a good time, although Eeyore wasn't quite sure whether they were trying to push the boulder into the garden or haul it out, that Eeyore didn't want to trouble them with his very own personal little problem. And now, after all that tracking without stopping for a single moment, not even for a bite of lunch, Eeyore was all but ready to give up. No one will even notice I was missing something except for a certain part of me that dislikes drafts and tends to get lonely, he grumbled to himself. He let out a deep sigh. But how will I wave goodbye and hello and how are you this morning without my tail? Eeyore sat down in the cool shade cast by a tall elm tree. Nope, he decided. I'll just have to find it myself. All at once, Eeyore was trying to stifle a yawn that had crept up on him unawares, but the yawn wouldn't hear of it being stifled. Just as soon as I have a little rest, Eeyore rumbled, with the yawn was finished within, I'm going to find that tail for sure. The yawn returned and stretched Eeyore's mouth open even wider. It'll be nice to have someone else do the finding for me, he murmured, his eyelids almost too heavy to hold themselves up any longer. It would be nice to have someone else doing everything for me, he added after a little more thought. Not that I've ever had the chance to find out. Before Eeyore could say another word or think another thought, his eyes closed and he was asleep. It seemed to Eeyore that he had only been dozing for a very short time when the air suddenly was filled with a very large blaring of an even larger trumpet. He opened his eyes to discover a smiling Pooh and Piglet standing before him, but it was a Pooh and Piglet, the likes of which he had never even seen before. Good afternoon, Your Highness, said the one who looked like Pooh and even sounded like Pooh, but certainly wasn't dressed like Pooh. This bear was wearing a bright green, long-sleeved doublet and hose, curly-toed slippers with bells dangling from the tips, and, to top it all off, a cap with a bushy feather that danced in the breeze every time Pooh bowed, which he seemed to be doing frequently. We've been looking all over you, said Piglet with a smile. He was clinging happily to a trumpet twice as tall as he was, and sporting an outfit exactly like Pooh's, only smaller. Excuse me, grumbled the amazed Eeyore, but is this a dream? Probably, Pooh chuckled. I don't suppose you'd find me dressed like this if it wasn't, would you? But it's only a dream if you want it to be, Your Tallness, Piglet added quickly. You're the prince, after all, and your slightest whim is our command. Prince, gasped Eeyore. I'm not a prince. In fact, if you look very closely, you'll notice I'm not a whole lot more than a donkey. A little bit scruffy, and perhaps not the best companion in the world, but I suit me pretty well. Oh, we're very familiar with how scruffy you are, sire, Piglet assured him, and it wouldn't be quite proper for us to mention that you are bad company, said Pooh, who quickly added, after a frantic nudge from Piglet, that you most certainly are not. But, protested Eeyore, who was growing more and more confused, how can I be a prince? I don't have a throne or a crown. He paused and sighed deeply before continuing. I don't even have a tail. Pooh and Piglet exchanged a look of keen surprise. Of course you don't have a tail, exclaimed Piglet at last. That's how we know you're the prince. It is? Asked Eeyore in amazement. Certainly, said Pooh. Having a tail is much too much trouble for a prince. You're much more inclined to let everyone else have a tail for him. Pooh looked at Eeyore and scratched his head. It would probably be someone very much like you, if you weren't the prince already, which is why, of course, You haven't got a tail, you see? Piglet didn't see it all and was about to say as much when Piglet raised his trumpet and rattled the leaves on the tree with another loud blast. "What was that for?" asked Eeyore when his ears had stopped ringing. We're fetching your throne and crown," answered Piglet. "Isn't that what you said you wanted?" Before Eeyore could answer that what he really said he wanted was his tail, Rabbit and Tigger, both of them dressed very much like Pooh and Piglet, marched into sight, carrying an immense chair that they quickly sat Eeyore down upon. "Comfy your donkeyness?" Tigger asked politely. Eeyore was about to answer that it wasn't precisely the most comfortable of seats, especially to someone who's used to having a tail, when he was interrupted by Gopher scurrying up with a most impressive-looking crown and placing it on Eeyore's head. "How'd you like that, Your Majesty?" he whistled. Eeyore waited a moment to see if anyone else was going to interrupt, then started to say how surprised he was that such a beautiful crown would be so heavy it made one's neck ache. He should have waited a bit longer, though, because at that moment Owl swooped down and presented Eeyore with a golden plate of thistles. "Snack, sire," Owl hooted warmly. Eeyore looked unhappily at the limp thistles. "I usually like them picked a little fresher," he said slowly. "Crisper that way," he added. "Oh, no, Your Majesty," Owl protested, shaking out a napkin and tying it around Eeyore's neck. "These are much tastier." "You eat thistles?" Eeyore asked. "Of course not," Owl replied. "I only pick 'em." "Is there anything else we can get for you?" asked Pooh, bowing as low as his tummy would permit. "Well," said Eeyore, looking around at the helpful faces, and decided to try one more time. "What I really want is my tail." After a long silence, during which everyone shifted nervously from one foot to the other, Rabbit finally said, "But, sire, you don't have a tail." "I know I don't have it," answered Eeyore as patiently as he could. "If I had it, I wouldn't want it, would I?" That stumped everyone for a moment. "Don't worry," a low voice spoke up that sounded very familiar to Eeyore. "I know where your tail is." Eeyore turned, opened his mouth to thank whoever was speaking, but what he saw was such a surprise that his mouth simply remained open, without a single word tumbling out. What Eeyore saw was Eeyore. Eeyore felt as though he were looking into a mirror, except that Eeyore he was looking at wasn't sitting awkwardly on a throne with a too heavy crown on his head and his mouth hanging open. Who are you, Eeyore?" "Our Eeyore, that is," stammered in wonder. "I'm the prince," answered Eeyore, the other one, "and you're sitting on my throne and wearing my crown." "I'm sorry," said Eeyore as he climbed down from the throne and carefully placed the crown on the seat. "No need to apologize," the prince smiled. "I was out seeing what it was like not to be a prince, sitting on your hilltop under the clouds and eating your thistles." The prince made a face and stuck out his tongue. "Don't like 'em much. Too crispy." "I told you," said Owl to Eeyore, puffing himself up proudly. "I suppose we all like what works for us," said Eeyore with a sigh. Where did you say you saw my tail?" "Up on that hard rock where you sit to watch the clouds," answered the prince. "I'm afraid it's stuck in a crack. Worse luck, I tried to get it out, but it was hopeless. Must be frightfully inconvenient having a tail, I mean." "Not if that's what you're used to," said Eeyore. "Right," said the prince with a laugh. "Thanks for your help," said Eeyore, grateful. "My pleasure," the prince bowed. "I suppose that's what dreams are for." "So this is a dream," said Eeyore, nodding. And at that, he immediately awakened to find himself still in the shade of the tall elm tree and feeling much better. Without wasting a moment, Eeyore ran up to his favorite hilltop as fast as his short legs could carry him. Faster, in fact, because he was quite anxious to get there. When he arrived at the rock, huffing and puffing from his run, he found his tail exactly where the prince had said it would be, stuck in a crack beneath the huge boulder. "Come on, tail," said Eeyore, grasping it with his mouth. "Let's go home." Eeyore gave the tail a pull, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck very tightly. Not to be dissuaded, Eeyore braced his feet and pulled with all his might. After a brief struggle, the tail sprung from the crack with a loud pop. Eeyore was suddenly sitting down, holding the tail in his mouth. Before he could recover, however, he heard a loud rumbling sound and looked up to see the huge boulder under which his tail had been trapped go tumbling down the hillside. "Oh no," moaned Eeyore, round the tail in his mouth. "It's headed right for Rabbit's garden." As he watched his friends look up at the sound of the approaching boulder and scatter out of its path, the rolling stones smashed heavily into the boulder sitting in the carrot patch, dislodging it. Then both rocks rolled harmlessly off Rabbit's property to settle happily in the middle of the cool stream at the bottom of the hill. "Eeyore, did you do that?" Rabbit demanded as the donkey came running down the hill with his newly reattached tail dangling behind him. "Well, I had a little help," said Eeyore, giving his tail a swing, "but I suppose you could say I did do it." Rabbit threw his arms around Eeyore's neck and hugged him with delight as Pooh and the others gathered around to congratulate him. "I didn't think we were ever going to get that monstrosity out of my carrots," exclaimed Rabbit. He patted Eeyore fondly. "You're a real prince of a fellow to have around, Eeyore. Thank you." And as the rest of his friends shouted their agreement, Eeyore blushed deeply and had a most difficult time not smiling. It was nothing, he told them, and as for being a prince, there may be a resemblance if you're not looking where I'm sitting. "It's the doing that counts, not the looking," Rabbit told him, and now Eeyore couldn't keep a wide smile from spreading over his face. "I think my tail would be inclined to agree with you," he told his friends happily, giving his tail an affectionate shake. "This simply isn't working out," complained Pooh, still wide awake. "Then there's only one thing for you to do," said Eeyore. "If you're interested, I'll tell you what it is." "I'm very interested, Eeyore," said Pooh. "What do I have to do?" "Find a mommy and tell her your troubles," Eeyore replied, "and we know where to find one of those." "Yes," Pooh said happily, "we certainly do." "Of course I can help," said Kanga, smiling at the anxious Pooh. She sat down in her rocking chair and lifted Pooh gently up onto her lap. "You just listen, and we'll get this all worked out once and for all. The most important thing for you to know is that everything is going to be all right." "All right, Kanga," said Pooh as he snuggled down comfortably on her lap. "I'm ready. And remember, Pooh," Kanga reminded him gently, one last time, that simply hearing a story isn't enough. You must listen to it until you feel it taking place inside you. "I'll listen, Kanga," Pooh yawned, feeling cozier than he had all day. "I promise." Well, Eeyore didn't have any success, but he did seem to have a winning suggestion. Go to a mommy and have her tell you a story, and that'll help you to sleep. And I'm pretty sure that he's right. So come back next time and let's find out if Pooh finally gets to have his sleep so that he can have his breakfast. Thank you for joining me for another story time with GamGam. You have an amazing day. I love you.